Alrighty, good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our webinar this morning. We're here to introduce you to a story of digital transformation. And before we kick off, let me introduce myself. My name is Peter Kokonakis. Some of you will know me as PK, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for MIP. We're based in Sydney, and we'll talk a little bit about MIP and our credentials later in the webinar. But today's focus is really going to be on a story of digital transformation, and a really interesting and exciting story that is steeped in the K-12 schooling system. While you're listening to the webinar, if you are in a different industry, think of not so much the students and the schools that you'll hear our speakers talk about. Think about your customers and your processes, your products and your suppliers. And from that perspective, you've got an opportunity to relate to some of the things that you hear in terms of best practice that we'll be talking about through the course of the morning. And you'll be able to bring that relationship back to your organization, back to your industry, back to your world in terms of how that would potentially apply. Now, the quotes that you see on the screen there about a digital transformation, we're talking about transparency and ease of releasing information. It sounds like we'll be talking a lot about data and analytics as part of this presentation as well, knowing my speakers, and talking about saving costs and time and operational excellence. A couple of drivers, and we'll come back to these. And of course, one of the things that any transformation has to do is it has to have a direct impact on the beneficiaries. And in this case, we're going to talk a lot about students and their learning experience. And I think this is going to be quite interesting, especially those of you that have been shut down in the last little while and acted as teachers to your kids, or you know, people who have actually been through that process. And you'll maybe appreciate the plight of the teacher in front of this, but also you'll see how sophisticated the engine is that drives some of the curriculum design, some of the identifying students with really good abilities, or students that need some intervention to help them realize their full potential. So it's actually a real privilege. I don't use the word lightly. It is a real privilege for me to introduce you to our speakers today. And the two gentlemen I have joining the call today is Raju Varanasi. He's the Director of Intelligence and the CIO of the Catholic Education Office based in Parramatta. And we'll get Raju to introduce himself and a little bit around the business that he operates in the Catholic school system. And our own principal consultant from MIP Australia, Ryan Lambert, who's been involved with CEDP and with Raju for at least 4 years, and is one of the guides in that the team here at CEDP use to help them drive some decisioning and help them drive some understanding of the benefits. So the agenda today is going to be that we're going to be asking some questions of these gentlemen, and we'll try and get some of the best practices out to give you a bit of an understanding of where they started, how they moved forward, and where the journey is going to take them to. Because being a journey, you never get to a destination. I think we'll be finishing up the call with what the next steps are and where the vision will take Raju and the team here. In the meantime, I'm going to encourage you all to ask questions via the Q&A panel. Unfortunately, we've got fortunately, actually, this is probably a fortunate thing. We actually got an amazing response to this webinar. So we've got so many of you, we can't unmute the phones, and I think the technology, when it gets over a certain number, it mutes them automatically. So you'll all be on mute. But if you do have questions, if you have comments, we're monitoring the Q&A panel. So if there's anything there, please give us the questions, and I'll pose them to the participants via your via the Q&A panel. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to Raju Varanasi. Good morning, Raju.
Good morning, PK.
How you doing?
Good, thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining today. I really appreciate you giving us not just your time, but the insight that you're going to be providing, because I think you've got an exciting story to tell, and hopefully we'll tease that out of you as we go. And good morning, Ryan. How are you doing?
Fantastic, thanks. How are you today?
Wonderful, wonderful. All righty, so we've got a couple of guys who are doing really, really well. Let me start, Raju. Why don't you do an introduction? Because anything I do would not be worthy of your background. So give us a bit of a brief history of where you're at, so people get a point of reference as to where you're talking from.
Thanks, PK. Hello, Ryan.
Hi.
I've been in education, particularly the school education sector, for 30 years in Australia. And I commenced my career actually as an engineer in India and worked in the commercial oil refining sector and for 6 years before I came here. So my first foray in the Australian market was in education, and I was lucky enough to stay there and work on very exciting projects. So about 20 plus years in the department, New South Wales, and last 5 years nearly at the Catholic education here in Parramatta. And so I started in curriculum, program management, innovation. I was the head of the innovation center in New South Wales department. And then I was fortunate to be appointed as the CIO as the Catholic Education Diocese of Parramatta in 2015. And hence started the exciting journey here.
Good for you. And the nuance there in engineering, I'm guessing you enjoy numbers and maths, right? So
yes,
we're going to come back to that a little bit in
yes.
terms of some of the vision that you painted for CEDP. So Ryan, your opportunity to tell the folks a little bit about yourself as well.
Sure. I've personally haven't had, up until I actually started at CEDP here some 4 odd years ago, I actually didn't have, prior to that, a lot of either consulting or direct employment regarding the education industry, and I've come to really enjoy it. I actually feel great inside actually coming in and helping Raju and the team here, and I actually am making a difference to students' lives. So when I'm dealing with these different types of challenges, it's really fascinating to me to kind of help that system, because I know I'm helping kids at the end of the day, and I'm improving their education. And you don't really get to say that a lot with, a lot of different sectors where you're actually you can actually see that change, especially over 4 years. You're actually seeing that growth. So for me, there, Parramatta being one of my main clients is fantastic, and I really enjoy it. In terms of other clients, I have also quite an extensive experience in banking, finance, telecommunications, lots of government clients as well. So, and my experience goes from, end-to-end architecture, project management, developer, business analyst, and even delivery manager. So I tend to dabble in end-to-end, and I'm across all of our MIP software as well. Primarily here at Parramatta, we use a lot of Alteryx, Tableau, SQL databases. We'll kind of, I guess, branch off into that further, but like Raju, myself, I've also come over from overseas, coming 5 years ago from Canada, where I was working at an investment bank as a systems analyst. And then once I've kind of gotten to here, I've started to go into consulting and really getting thorough experience across different environments. So education is definitely one of my favorite, and I like to make that change when I come in here. I put on my hero hat, and I say, let's try and help some students out today. So it's a good feeling.
Good for you. It's I noticed you kept your chartered accountancy credentials out of the picture there. So someone again with probably a bent for numbers, having
yes.
come from that background, right?
Yes, definitely love the numbers. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll come back to that as well. So we'll do that. All right. So a bit of context from you then, Raju. Tell us a little bit about the organisation and the business of CEDP, so the listeners can sort of get a bit of a peg for where the scale of the challenges you deal with.
Thanks, PK. We are a school system of 81 schools based in Western Sydney. So Parramatta is where the the central office, so to speak, is here, but our schools range from Granville to the Blue Mountains. So 56 primary, 25 secondary, some are P2P in the sense they are K-12 schools. Some other schools are K-6 and 7 to 12. We have 43,000 students, more than 3,000 full-time staff, and of course many thousand casual contract staff. We are basically an entity of over 500 million in operation. So we are a largish organization if we take in commercial terms.
That's a significant operation, right? Especially given that you also have the physical assets of schools and some of the other issues that go with that. So the one thing that that jumps out to me though is the ability to track. And let me use the word customer for some people to make a relationship back to their organisation. But you can track your customers or your students over a longitudinal period. So you've got 13 years of data for some of the students in the system, right? So that must be a unique for any industry, right?
Yes, and very fortunate that well before my time, I must add, the executive director and the leadership team were very keen on data. So they actually ensured compilation of data, say from 2008, 2007 onwards in some data sets. So when I came in 2015, I was very fortunate that there was a strong foundation already, and in what we call enterprise approach. Enterprise approach in short means each school is not different in its system, in its nomenclature, in its data points and field names. All of this have been compiled with some standardization. So when I came in, already the foundation was well in place thanks to the leadership team. But where we moved was from having static data to dynamic real-time dashboards. So that was the jumping point, if you like, or the watershed point in the data journey.
So that must be a significant stepping stone, right? I mean, IT and computing has been around for 50, 60 years in the commercial space. And we've always had some reporting, whether it's periodic, end of week, end of day, end of month, end of year. But to get to something very dynamic where you now can report on results almost in real time and watch progress or regress of performance across schools, students, right down to the curriculum level, and even ascertain whether subjects are potentially a challenge. That must be a revolutionary approach, right?
Yeah, it was very fortunate that the leadership said, let's move into real-time data. I mean, it has its own challenges because take attendance, take grades, take behavioral reports like well-being and so on. What we did is those reports used to be after the event. And report by definition is after the event. What we want is during the event, at the event, sort of thing. So which means we can monitor in real time, because after the event, there is only so much you can do. Yeah. You can learn, definitely. Yeah, you can learn. Happened, right? Yeah. And we use that learning, and I'll come into machine learning in the later part. But what we wanted to do was allow intervention, allow support as you see it, rather than a month later. Okay. That's the big change.
That's really cool. So Ryan, in your experience, like coming into CEDP, fresh-faced in the education system, relate it back to maybe some of the other industries like banking, where data seems to be the business and driving. How did you see CEDP in the early days, and what do you think were the sort of catalyst for change for them?
I think one of the big things with CEDP is they work together as a community, and I think that's very important, because when you actually look at banking, things are very siloed into business units. They're competitive. They're not working together a lot of the time. Whereas here, it's always been a really big, nice community. And you would have centralized reporting here, things like Excel reports, or, you'd have prepared PowerPoints to the executive, or Word documents, with all commentary. And this transformation kind of took that and say, well, there's a huge network at our schools that want to practice things day to day, want to see things in real time. So let's make a self-service platform, bring their data literacy up and actually say, okay, you know what, we want to involve teachers, we want to involve principals heavily, we want to involve coordinators heavily. We're going to push this content to you, and you can now self-service and actually find your analytical journey to figure out what things do you want to track, what are you interested in. And then this creates a cyclical approach where we're always engaged in improving content over time. And you further cement that data literacy status in those schools as well. They're actually become dependent on it. They thrive on it. And that's, when you're starting that journey out, it's critical to involve those communities, those people, those business end users, because they're going to help shape what your solutions look like, but they're also going to buy into the ownership, right? So like Raju was saying, attendance, that was one of our big initial self-service dashboards. Principals, teachers, very interested to see how their attendance are tracking. They also want to see, well, this student's missing my class. What other classes are they missing? Are they missing certain periods? Is it because they're late? You can really delve into these different, questions and answers. And that's really cementing, that status of I'm becoming reliant on this. I love to see this. And they're going to start recommending new content, and it's going to grow from there. And it's very powerful to involve them in that journey to help kind of do that transformation.
So when I was a kid, and maybe I'm guilty, but the roll was taken with a bit of paper and a pen, and it was then folded neatly away in the teacher's drawer, right? So we talk about a digital transformation. So I understand one of the systems is now taking attendance via iPad or via electronic means. Correct. So what does that mean? Because that's only the first step of what we call a digital transformation, right? Capturing the data at the event, and I like that during the event is a really powerful concept for digital transformation, because if you don't change your thinking to saying, I now have the data at the event rather than post, how did that change your thinking, or how did it change your approach to designing systems for the schools?
So, it's all about trying to flow those results through. And the other thing too is with that is when you have that digital transformation in place, something like attendance, one big thing as well as, accurate reporting. And, back with the old pen and paper roll call, if a student came in late to class, the teacher might forget to give them that pen and paper and fill in. Now with technology, we're able to send reminders to the teacher. Well, what about this student? We still don't have an attendance record for that period. And then we can kind of get that accurate data reflected, adjusted, and it's all really, really powerful. And with taking that roll call, it'll go straight into the student information system, which will then live connect back to our database, which goes into our reporting systems 10, 15 minutes later, and they can kind of see that refreshing, and they can see that constant update throughout the day.
So our feedback loop is shrinking, really, right? So
correct.
The ability to act on something, if you can jump into the process at the event rather than waiting minutes, hours, days, or weeks after the
event.
And
like I said too, it helps with correcting and making sure you have very strong data, right? There's less missing data. The data is stronger. It's enforced. Depending on the entry method, like the iPad, there's going to be now mandatory things, right? A pen and paper, there's nothing mandatory. You just fill in whatever. And
a little bit flexible, you think, a little bit too flexible.
And you could have entry errors, right? It's hard to potentially read. With the digital transformation, these things just improve. You get less errors. It's quicker. It's more timely, and overall has a greater impact. And we can do a lot more in the office here with good structured data. And we'll talk about that in a bit, but it's quite powerful to have really good flexible data like that. And the timeliness is very important.
Cool. All right. So Raju, now when you first started here, the systems, I assume you said the focus was on data, and you would have had some systems to track that. You've changed some of the systems now to help facilitate better tracking of data and better data. Talk about one of the things, I think the first thing you put in place was like a data warehouse, a data mart, or repository, for lack of better words. Help us understand the way that you approach that and why your thinking around that was a key sort of first step for you.
Yeah, as I said, there was a good starting point. Data culture was there well before my time, but our executive director, Greg Whitby, and the leadership team wanted actually data to see the light of the day. Data in static form in spreadsheets is good, accurate, but it doesn't do the magic that you want. Data in visualized form in dashboards, as Ryan said, only when it sees the light of the day, you can also see that it is accurate or not. And only then you would actually see that it's making a difference or not. So what we did is a program of visualizations in partnership with MIP, with yourselves and Ryan and Craig, with the backbone in actually converting all this data into dashboards. We had at one time 600 dashboards on every aspect of our business, and I'll come to that aspect of business in the framework that we used. So, moving on from there, the consumers of this are teachers, system leaders, principals, assistant principals, counselors. There's finance people, my colleagues in learning leadership and colleagues in organizational communications. Everyone has some data to go through. So, and that actually helped a lot because the feedback cycle that you mentioned is actually users consuming it and very quickly plowing it back in terms of their business improvement or changes and ultimately transformation.
Interesting that you say again, seeing the light of day, and I think I'm guessing now that with a transformation like this, you're shortening the cycle from the time that you capture data to the time you feed it back to then be able to get more positive feedback from the school system and the principals and the administrators, right?
Yeah, I think what actually happens is that the framework allows for looking at different types of data sets. One of the cultural elements that I would like to impress upon the audience is that you got to have a collective ownership of data. You cannot have siloed data. So data should have one virtual home, and that's where the data hub bringing these data sets together, because the cross-linking of these data sets actually give a powerful insight or insights which you will not find in one data set. So the data set on NAPLAN doesn't tell you why NAPLAN results are what they are. The data set on attendance doesn't tell you why attendance is up or down. It might be in demographics, it might be in other data sets, which it could be well-being, culture, and community, and so on. So we brought that multi-lens approach, which actually would make a huge difference to taking a holistic view of the student, of the learner, of the child.
Actually, you bridge perfectly to the next topic, which is really this view of and I love this this graphic that you guys use internally with your 6 lenses. And I think I talk about width of data versus depth. I think in some cases people want to do analytics and they just want more volumes of data. And transactional data sometimes will give you some insight, but it's not the be all and end all. I think what you're talking about there is what I call width of data. So it's getting the attendance record, but then marrying it up with the demographic. And if you could find out, I don't know, as a previous marketer, it'd be wonderful to have things like eye color and hair color and height, and to work out if there's all different things that make an impact on the learning ability of a student, right? And again, you can't track all that stuff. It's not feasible. It's not reasonable. But width of data, and I think you guys have done a great job of bringing in that one source of truth from many, many different areas. You put it in the repository, and now you view it through this. So help us understand where this six lenses came from, because I think it's a really powerful approach.
Yeah, forsaking a bit of humility, I may have to say that, yes, I developed this framework in a moment of inspiration. I got it trademarked, of course. And,
of course.
and published it, and so on and so forth. But what actually the intent for the audience is like this. You need to, if you want to have a 360-degree view, metaphorically, And what are those angles? And what are those data sets? So can I just explain the framework? No one would debate in the school system or anywhere in the community, in the society, that school, student, and teacher are the most important entities in the school system. So those are the three lenses. What you take at a school level can change when you look at student level. What you take at teacher level, teacher experience, teacher qualifications, teacher certification, teacher professional learning, you have different types of sets for different types of audiences. Same thing with students. Students might be taking interventions. Students might be of certain acceleration courses, or they are doing some special programs. Same thing with schools. Some schools get additional funding because of the socioeconomic composition of the school. All these details are basically data points and filters. And once you start looking at those three lenses have opened up one aspect. I would call them as internal entities: school, student, and teacher. Now you got to go outside in view. And those are the other three lenses. Who are they? The family and the religion. That means it's in the family. And then community and culture. That's your socio-economic composition of your community, because that makes a big difference in some aspects of schooling globally, not just Australia, not Western Sydney. Globally, we know communities make a difference in schooling and schooling impacts. And then the third one, which actually not many recognize overtly, are the regulatory and the government and the compliance reporting. School education is one of the most regulated entities in any governmental landscape. And what we needed to do was to even take those data sets. We have to report on students, you have to report on teachers, you have to report on schools. So the three other lenses are external, outside in lenses. The first three are inside out lenses. The moment you have outside in and inside out view, you are actually in a better space to actually have a view about your data.
Well, it goes back to the basics of even the balanced scorecard view, right? And running a business, you have your four different dimensions of financial, customer, process, and improvement, and all those things that go with that. And I think you've taken this next step because it's really fine-tuned to your business, to your customer needs, and really looking at all that impact. So again, I take my hat off to I think the whole concept of the six lenses is something, again, for maybe our listeners to take away from this session today about don't look at one parameter, don't look at two parameters. There's a whole, as you say, inside out and outside in view of the data. And I think we've talked about executive buy-in. I think it sounds like you already had that happening. And I think I remember talking to you, and we noticed a bit of a step in the executive buy-in when you started looking at more advanced analytics. I think, Ryan, one of the first things was something with spatial analytics about where the students were living in relation to schools and catchment areas, right?
Yeah, like Raju was saying earlier, I think the big thing is to do cross-functional analysis and making your data more wide, like you were mentioning. When you have some of these software systems or these online portals where they collect a very specific set of data, like people might be very familiar with like a CRM system, for example. You can't just look at that data. You have to pull it down. You have to make a central repository to report off this stuff, because that's not your whole business. There's data coming from everywhere. If you cross-functionally combine that data, that's when you start to do advanced analytics, and no different than the spatial side of things as well. So where we're pulling data from that, from our student information system, we pull from the enrollments module, details about where those families are living. And then we see what schools they're going to. And then we can marry up with that different performance metrics. So things like, okay, let's take an example of plotting where these families live around this school, school A, for example. And we have 300 families at the school. It's a primary school. We can then start to plot things like drive time distance, and then we can even make that as a rate based on attendance. So we can say, is the distance of that student affecting their attendance rate? Is it affecting their absences? Then we can even go even further, saying, well, let's marry up distance with attendance with performance. So how are their ADE grades for those different classes they're in? How does that compare to attendance and distance? And then we can actually be proactive on that. So saying, well, this southern west hub, we have about 70 families here. They're struggling to get their students to school on time, and their performance is being affected by that. So maybe we should proactively offer a bus service. We'll suggest to families, hey, we might do a bus service pickup for this catchment area. And then we can talk to those families saying, is this something you'd be interested in? Are you struggling to get your students to school on time? What's happening here? It could be a pocket of Sydney that has really bad traffic, or it's significantly far away. And these are the things you can do with spatial analytics, right? You can actually start to survey, and then things like catchment area as well. So you can look to see, well, where are my students coming from? So putting on a principal view from enrollment. So okay, where's my students coming from? And then, us as a system too, we can work with that school to say, well, maybe we should be focusing on this area. And then once again, it's that cross-functional. We can pull in value-added data, such as data from the ABS, and we can look at things like SA4s or postcodes and seeing what's the growth in this area. Because we deal with a lot of growth areas out Box Hill, Marsden Park, Leppington, all those southwest or northwest Sydney regions that are kind of near our catchment area. They're growing, right? And we can evaluate the demographics there for those outside schools on the fringe of our area as they're growing, those growth areas, and we can target those families. And we can do all that with spatial analytics.
And interestingly, just for your audience purposes, actually, as Ryan said, when you know the distance of the student's home or residence to the school, guess what? Is attendance dependent on distance, and or partial absence dependent on distance? The hypothesis was, oh yeah, if they live far, they will be actually late to school. We didn't find that in the data.
Correct.
In fact, the more latecomers to school are the ones who live down the road.
And, they took it for granted.
Exactly.
It's a 2-minute walk, but
yeah, exactly.
I'll leave after 2 minutes after school.
I'll get up at 8:30.
We busted a lot of myths in whether it is about distance, whether it is about some of the cultural elements in school or in the community, or the growth areas and socioeconomic aspects of the community and how they affect. So some held true, some were consistent, but some were not. Well, so we were questioning some of the myths.
Yeah, look, I remember the conversation we had about attendance and performance, and while attendance doesn't necessarily isn't a driver for performance, non-attendance is a driver for non-performance.
Well said, PK. That is very important.
And I think they're the kinds of things that, again, people that are not in the school system, think about some of the myths that you have about your customers or about your product or about your suppliers in your supply chains, that you think, oh, this is my best customer, or this is my worst customer, this is my best performing supplier. Until you look at the data, you don't really know that that's the case, and it's important to break those myths and to bust through that false sense of security that you have in gut feel. And I think in good times, someone who's been around 30 years in a business will know pretty well what's happening in their business. But in uncertain times, like we're in, we went through the GFC, we're now going through another period of uncertainty in terms of what's happening in the market, in businesses. Analytics, I think, has to be the fallback for this stuff, right?
Just just to summarize on the attendance, I know we are not just talking about attendance, but good attendance is not a guarantee for good performance. But generally, when we mapped all the good attendance regular attendees, they're always better performers. Poor attendance is actually a bigger guarantor of poor performance. So it works in its absence. And that's one. Secondly, we just did one. Our younger students in a cohort underperforming to the older kids, like because you can have 7 years and 6 months to 8 years and 6 months in one class. Right. And there was some research paper which said younger kids are actually underperforming. We busted that myth too. They only, it's not underperforming. Suppose you are a younger child in your cohort. In year 3, you might be doing a bit lesser because you're still, somehow on the, because in 6 months is a long time in a 3-year-old's, year 3 child's, 7-year-old, 8-year-old's life. But by the time they come to year 5, year 7, year 9, that hypothesis doesn't hold water. Yeah. So we busted some of those myths, and the reason is the granularity and the cross-sectional view of data. So to the participants, I urge, in case you are looking at data to inform your business or your schooling, it has to be cross-sectional. Not one data set is going
Correct.
to do the magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm just going to pause for a second here. We've got, looks like more a comment from one of our participants. I won't share the name just in case there's an issue with that, but it looks like maybe there's a few other schools listening in on our webinar this morning. We've started using touchscreens for attendance. Students swipe a card at the door of the class to sign into the class. It makes a significant difference to the administration requirements of the class. So again, this is that capture at the event. So it sounds like it's becoming more a standard approach rather than
silent, streamlined, digital, and non-invasive attendance process. It's the whole. You default everyone to yes, and then you just take by to know how long does it take, and then you go on to do your business. And we have in a couple of schools put electronic readers because high school students also learn in the library. They learn anywhere, anytime. They're all connected and they have their mobile devices. So obviously attendance is not one of those closed door in the class. That's why I don't use those physical artifacts much. Yeah. The class, the timetable, the all those things are slowly getting out of into an open architecture, because
and transparency is one of the key things for the transformation.
Exactly. So data will actually also ask you to question your own assumptions of class, school, time, place. It's amazing.
All right, we've got a couple of impatient people as well. There's a couple of questions there about where the next steps are and what's happening around machine learning and stuff, which I think you mentioned before. We'll get there. Yeah, so we'll get to that. Now, interestingly, and I think, Ryan, you mentioned before about once you share the data, once you share some of the insight, you get better improved feedback as well. So help us understand the kind of feedback that you guys now get and how does that improve the process of designing future systems and future insights?
Yeah, so initially when we first started, we were going with a blank slate. We would theoretically, let's say we start with a few principal user groups. The principals, being new to the world of data and reporting, were kind of relying on us as experts to kind of suggest things. But they're very much taking that role now, where when we look to have meetings with them, they're the ones suggesting everything. Like, they know exactly what they want. Like, oh, let's tweak that, let's tweak this, let's add this in. So they're very switched on in terms of data now and exactly what they want to look at, where the gaps are in the current reporting, how they want to keep growing that. So it's a huge transformation that we've seen here.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Data literacy, I know sometimes people question the levels of data literacy. The only way data literacy improves is giving more data. Because they actually are, I'm very, very grateful and very lucky in a way that our school system in Parramatta has principals who have really, the maturity is not a linear process. It is exponentially grown. In 3 years, the amount of innovation that our directors, our executive director, and our principals have given back to us. So what we are getting is the new set of innovations are not actually driven by the IT team or the data team or us. It is being driven by our key stakeholders, that is principals and APs.
And when we've also adjusted the ways we've actually received feedback now too. So a lot of the ways, we would potentially back how we started, go have sessions at their schools or kind of meet come to the office here. We're doing Zoom sessions now. We take feedback through multiple angles. So, we have a full Google platform here. So we'll have Google Sheets. We'll have Google Sheets to take requirements back. We'll have Confluence pages to have feedback with principals. And we most recently, I think a couple of years ago now, we've got Qualtrics now, which is our survey tool. So we'll actually put surveys out to get feedback, not just from requirements or projects, how we've run those, but actually to run different things, you know, well-being surveys for students, well-being surveys for staff, whole range. We've even used our survey platform for tests within the school. So we'll have multiple choice tests.
Wow.
And then we suck that up into Qualtrics database. We'll pull that with Qualtrics into our data hub and flip it into Tableau. And you know, 10 minutes later, we have results of these tests done. Whereas before, back you would have paper tests, you'd have to mark. It's instant now.
Yeah, it is not fragmented anymore. It is more digitized. That means again real time, and it's actually this pre and post test. It's like the transparency part. If you're doing some training to a teacher or students, and you have pre and post, within the end of the day, you are actually seeing some of the change that might have occurred due to that interaction. And that is very reinforcing. You got to reinforce certain practices. You got to drop some practices. You got to change some practices. The only way you can do that is getting that pulse data, whether it's through a survey, through feedback, through whatever the form, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. Please don't misunderstand that all data has to be quantitative.
Correct.
It can be qualitative, and we make sense of a lot of qualitative data too.
Yeah, so text mining is starting to become more and more.
Are we talking about machine learning yet?
Well, no, we'll get there, but we will get there. So actually, the one thing I will challenge though is, I suppose, as it becomes more business as usual, as the principals rely more and more on this, and the floodgates open, so you overcome some of the cultural barriers potentially initially of people being reluctant to use data. Now you've got them to the point where they're using data, they're now reliant on it, they're feeding you back lots of good stuff. How do you secure the data? So maybe Ryan, you can talk to because
Sure.
one extreme is I build independent systems for everyone in the system, but then I have a lot of replication. So
sure.
How do you secure this? Because you've got some sensitive data here that we're dealing with.
Right? That's most sensitive. You have some stuff like child protection data or physical violence issues at schools, and so you know how our business works here is primarily we'll have lots of different software applications for different modules. So our main business drivers obviously our student information system, which is now Compass. So all of our different software is integrated on our network. So in our situation, being Catholic schools, we go through CNET primarily with that, but we have an extensive Active Directory setup here. So everyone is given an account, but we also use SAML integration. So applications and accounts are given access to this different software. Within the software itself, that account is given roles and privileges. So if we're talking Compass, for example, your account will be set up through Active Directory. You'll have access to it now. But within the Compass module as well, we determine what screens, what actions, what data you can see. And it's no different with Tableau, right? So if an internal user here, let's say a teacher wants to have access to an HSC dashboard to see HSC results, that teacher has an AD account already. We'll provision them access to a project folder, to a workbook, and then in role level security, we'll take their school ID, which is known as an age ID here. We'll then map that age ID to that user. So when that user accesses that dashboard, they just see their school. And we can even do it at a class level. So we'll actually go to the school class. So that teacher only sees their class when they log in. So one set of content, but each user sees different things. And typically, that's effectively how our security is done here, and it's very robust, and there's business owners for all different levels of approval of security. So
role-based.
Exactly.
And so one school can't see other schools, the granular data.
Correct.
And the principal can't see. And so they are all role-based and due permission regime, and we have a sandbox for making sure that the quality assurance is done before. So there's workflows and assurance processes, and one of these is, of course, to make sure that the data is secure.
And look, it's a key part of any transformation piece. As you get more and more data, you have to think, harder and probably earlier into the process around how you're going to secure that, because just lumping it into a bucket and letting everyone have at it doesn't work either, right?
Yes, but I just like to reiterate this point, because I've seen areas where if a CIO thinks that security is the only purpose of data, then you are not allowing the data to see the light of the day. Right. So you got to make sure that it's secure. Secure doesn't mean you lock it up in such a way that even the very users of the system, teachers and principals and system leaders, cannot see it. That's not the purpose of security. Security is to make sure the right data is in the right hands, not that no data is in anyone's hands. That's not actually the intent.
Well, that defeats the purpose.
And I would like to add to that too. I mean, you have something like child protection data, right? And like Raju saying, you secure it so much that no one can see these things. There's common ways around that though. You secure that no one can see the very detailed incidents, but we can aggregate those. And now you can see, okay, this school had this many types of incidents in this month for these different reasons. So now you don't actually know who the event was, and now you can actually give that data to more of a broad audience. You've aggregated it past the individual comments, the person who was involved, because ultimately in a lot of analytics and things of that nature, it's not important. It's actually more important to see the trend. I want to see the trend. What's happening here? How can we fix it? It's not looking at those individual cases. And to go to the individual level, we can then allocate a more detailed level of security for those people that need those specific cases to do actions on, for example.
All right, so let's just recap a little bit. We started with CEDP, quite a large school system, lots of students, lots of teachers, lots of staff, lots of curriculums. Started 4 years ago on a journey where, but it was static, it wasn't interactive, it was a record of what happened in the past rather than what's happening today. So part of the digital transformation was getting the data at the event, and I'll come back to that. I think that's a really crucial part of any transformation, because that then has to change your thinking about what you can do with the data once you have it at the event. I think that's where you're going. So I think that's really good. Started some advanced analytics. We talked a little bit about the spatial analytics and a little bit of the advanced analytics, and we talked a little bit about securing data after the floodgates opened up. Let's talk about the future here, because I know you've already stepped your toe into the water of machine learning, some automated artificial intelligence. Where's that headed? What have you done so far, and where's that headed?
So now we finished after the event and at the event. Now we are embarking on before the event might happen. Before a problem becomes a problem, you can do something. That is the proactive side. Yep. To be a bit harsh, the past I used to call in meetings the postmortem. You can do postmortem, but you can't bring life. But if you actually do proactive intervention, or proactive, which is where the prediction part comes, you can make even more positive change. So in quest of that, Ryan and myself, we took 10-year HSC data, and we actually looked at no less than 10,000 students who have done 15 popular subjects. Yes, and right. We actually predicted the 2019 HSC to an accuracy of over 90%. It was 93% plus when you take plus minus 3 marks. That means in biology, we predicted 87 and you got 88 or 89. So that is plus minus 2, so to speak. Yeah. So we predicted
within a threshold of 3.
Threshold of 3, modulus of 3, plus minus 3. So that is the amount of potential. And we are now actually taking even further. We have now looked at the legacy of subject provisioning. That means, where is biology taught well? Why is the cohort in this school, biology is in this cluster, high performing cluster, but in another school it is not. But even though the students are of comparative ability. So that means you can now go into aspects of instruction, pedagogy, school culture, school differences, which prediction is not trying to be the big brother for school system. Prediction is to be the support. It is another element of support to the schools. And that, fortunately, again, our executive and our principals have taken a more positive view of where prediction becomes another alert before any problem may arise. So we are using to support, not to just do some chest thumping of how accurate the model is. I'm not worried about the model's accuracy per se. I'm worried about, can we do something to the child, to the learner, before a problem might arise?
Absolutely, and I'll just elaborate on one good use case too. I mean, a lot of machine learning use cases in things like banking and finance, it's all about ROI. How much money is this going to make me? Here in education, there's a huge use case for actually student well-being, right? You know, improving that student well-being and trying to give them help. So we've actually had really good buy-in from a lot of our business owners, and one of them is our early intervention program for mathematics. So we have an early years intervention program for year ones, year twos, and it's called EMU. And part of EMU is identifying students that are at risk and giving them help, bring them into the program, helping them to, you know, get their, you know, their math back on track so they can, you know, be around their course or their grade average. So we've used machine learning to actually pull 6 years worth of EMU history, look at those students, compare them against non-EMU students. Our target variable was NAPLAN year 3 numeracy. And we actually got some very big insights out of that. And what we got from the insights were the ability to actually now have a prediction pipeline to forecast future students' NAPLAN and use that for inclusion into the program. So EMU actually has an intervention test at the start of the year to see what the priority level of that student is to get into the program. There are certain cases, though, where those students are doing okay in that test, but their NAPLAN prediction is quite low because there's more to the picture than just the test or the interview. And that's a huge thing that we are able to do. We actually will run them through. So now the people administering EMU will have the test plus the results of the model, and they can now evaluate the student as a whole, seeing, which is one of our insights. Let's say multiple siblings. We saw, you know, potentially families, the student there, if they're a younger sibling and there's 3 or 4 other siblings, their results tend to be a bit lower. Or there's different cohorts or different schools where these things are being taught a little bit stronger. And then we can say, okay, well, in this area or this cohort area, we can give additional assistance to the student, or we can, and this reinforces also the ability of the EMU program, saying, you know, we can see this growth, this improvement, and that's reinforcing it with predictive analytics.
So in a way, what we are doing is, are we choosing the right students for right interventions?
Correct.
Are we giving the right support for whether it's literacy, numeracy, or any other aspects of learning? Are we giving the right support at the right time? And what is our data saying? And then, of course, we are asking the last question, which is a more hard-nosed question: is that making a difference? We have given this much investment, whether it is in the form of human resources, additional teachers, additional support, and at a point in time, like whether it's 6 months or 12 months or 2 years later, we can still ask the question, did it make a difference? So you have a feedback loop, you have an evaluative mindset, you have a culture of asking, inquiring about your own work, rather than saying, so it's not about purely being data aware, data rich, but it's also having an evaluative mindset to go with the data. So that's the insights and asking questions. So fortunately, again, our school system is very well aware that you have to ask insight after insight will only lead to questions,
More
not
questions,
answers.
right? Indeed.
Not
asking
answers.
the right question and then taking action on that. And I think one of the things that's coming through again and again when we talk is that the insights that you generate drive changes in behavior, changes in action. So it's action-based analytics as opposed to insight for insight's sake. It's about changing curriculums. It's about intervention. It's about support. And I think that's the key message I think that I would like to say. If I was going to summarize this, is if you're going to take a journey like this, you need to think about what the action, what the behavioral change is going to be at the end of the process, because it's the first step of another process and it's the first step of another question, and it just keeps going. So the journey never ends is pretty much what I'm going to say.
Yes,
right?
absolutely, PK. The data, and I just want to impress upon your participants to say, data is all behavioral. It's not structural, it is behavioral. That means data is about people. And it will not make a difference if the people behavioral mindsets, evaluative mindsets do not change. I know we have not talked about the technical aspects of extraction and visualizing and publishing dashboards. I know a couple of your audiences wanted to see dashboards. They're all there on the net in various presentations in previous conferences and so on. But what is important in this particular webinar, we wanted to share our collective journey, MIP and CEDP, with Ryan as our strategic partner. We have adopted him here. So we wanted to make sure that the people side of analytics, the human side of analytics, is actually the real change element, not data per se, while data acts as the catalyst to change.
All right, that's a really good summary and a really good point to maybe look at wrapping up. We're getting close to the top of the hour here, so I think thank you so much for your time. If I could summarize something out of this, it seems to me like the first step is making sure that you have the right data. So getting it into a format that's accessible, trying to get the data as quickly as possible so it's fresh, relevant at the point of the transaction, putting it into a system that allows you to then cross-reference it. So the ability to get width, what I referred to earlier as width of data is key. So getting your data house in order, making sure you've got good quality data, a wide section of data that's not so narrow that you can't really see outside into different parts of the customer profile, the customer's behaviors, the customer's demographics.
And longitudinal, if you can.
Well, you guys have got a special, case here because you've got, I would say, captive customers, but not so much. We talk about leakage into other school systems, but you do have the privilege of having lots and lots of customers or students that give you a really good cross-section of data that allows you to get some great insights. And again, it looks like from the perspective that you've got some really strong technical support, and I take my hat off to Ryan's technical ability and his architectural nous, where he's put together, I think, a solution based around the auto AI and ML and the algorithms. He's got a really good deep insight to that. Ultrix, which is sort of the pivotal part in that allows you to get to the data. But and thanks to our good partners at Tableau, who've actually helped a lot with part of this webinar, but also a lot of the work that they do in providing. And I think it was letting people see and understand their data. But I go back to their fast, easy, beautiful tagline. I think they allow people to really do that fast, easy, beautiful visualization. So look, I think that's where we are here. There's like I said, a few questions I think you've mentioned before that people wanted to see some screenshots of dashboards and things. I think this was more about the transformation journey rather than the visualization end result. The end result is important, and I think it's the skin that the schools, the principals, the administrators all use to interact with the data. This leg of the journey was more about helping you understand all the wonderful things that we do. Just as a wrap up, for those of you that are new to MIP, we are a consultancy. We are the gold partner for Tableau, the premier partner for Ultrix in region. We do a lot of great things with not just technology, but some really smart people to bring the technology to life. And recently we announced the data school, and we found that trying to get good analytics people in the marketplace is getting harder and harder with the right sort of skill sets to bring it all together. So we decided to bring a program into play where we actually are creating the next generation of data analysts and data scientists. And if anyone's interested in talking to us about the data school, please give us a call. But it really is all about what we've talked about here today, the ability to transform, to provide self-serve analytics and provide the answer to the next question when you don't know what the next question is going to be, which is always a big part of the challenge. So again, I'd like to thank Raju. I'd like to thank Ryan for their time this morning and their insight. And I think if there's any other questions, we'll be here for another probably about 5 or 10 minutes if I can keep Raju from his next meeting a little bit. But thank you for attending. Thanks, guys. We'll be following up with a link for this webcast. So if you wanted to share it with colleagues and your teams, that will be there as well. So
and separately too, I mean, if you have to leave and don't have time to ask your questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. Anything from basic data prep, architecture, right to deep learning and text mining. Auto ML. Happy to take any of those questions offline as well. So feel free to reach out to us.
All right, guys. We'll call it in here. Thank you to all the people for attending. Look out for the link that we'll be sending through in email. Cheers.